Madame, my ears have been so deafened, and my understanding so grieved, and my heart so affrighted, to hear the dreadful news of the abominable murder of your mad husband and my slain cousin, that I scarcely have the wits to write about it. I cannot dissemble that I am more sorrowful for you than for him. Oh, Madame, I would not do the office of faithful cousin or affectionate friend if I studied rather to please your ears than employed myself in preserving your honour. I will not at all dissemble what most people are talking about, which is that you will look through your fingers at the revenging of this deed, and that you do not take measures that touch those who have done as you wished, as if the thing had been entrusted in a way that the murderers felt assurance in doing it. I exhort you, I counsel you, and I beseech you to take this thing so much to heart that you will not fear to touch even him whom you have nearest to you, if the thing touches him, and that no persuasion will prevent you from making an example out of this to the world, that you are both a noble princess and a loyal wife. Praying the Creator to give you the grace to recognize this traitor and protect yourself from him, as from the ministers of Satan. With my very heartfelt recommendations to you, very dear sister. So that is a letter, Tom, written by Elizabeth I on the 24th of February, 1567. She's writing to Mary, Queen of Scots. She is writing following the murder 2 weeks previously of Mary's husband and Elizabeth's cousin, Scotland's leading cockchick, I believe is the technical term, Lord Darnley. So this is an amazing document making all kinds of slightly passive-aggressive allegations.
Yes.
And it's a document that led Antonia Fraser in her wonderful book about Mary, Queen of Scots, to describe the murder of Lord Darnley as the most debatable, as well as surely the most worked over murder in history. Now, we always love a murder, and we love in particular a Scottish murder.
A murder.
Yeah. Just give us the outline of the crime before we get going.
So we've done JFK, and I guess probably that would be the most celebrated murder in history. But it hasn't been around for, centuries and centuries like this one has. Antonia Fraser is absolutely right. This is a murder people have been going over for century after century after century. And I think that the barest outline of the crime makes clear why. So at 2 a.m. on the 10th of February, 1567, the house on the edge of Edinburgh, where Lord Darnley, so Mary Queen of Scots' husband, had been staying, was blown to smithereens, blown sky high. Strangely, however, Darnley had not perished in this explosion. Instead, he and his valet were found without any marks of injury in a nearby garden. They had been laid out very neatly, and next to them was a chair, a rope, and a thick fur cloak. So all the elements of an astonishing murder mystery.
Agatha Christie style.
Very. So some obvious questions. Who killed Darnley? How did they kill him? Where did they kill him? And what is going on with the chair and the rope and fur cloak? But of course, the most sensitive question of all is the one that Elizabeth I in that letter you read has directly fixed on, which is, is Mary complicit in the murder? Because Elizabeth says, this is what people are saying, and you have to take steps to ensure, that this mud doesn't stick. Another specific point that Elizabeth is making in that letter, she is hinting at the gossip that Mary had not only planned the murder, but had done so in association with one particular accomplice, who Elizabeth doesn't name in her letter, but describes as being like a minister of Satan. And who Elizabeth is alluding to, we will come to in due course, because we're going to be doing a deep dive into the murder and then trying to solve the riddle of what happened. But just to emphasize, what Elizabeth is doing in that letter is echoing claims and counterclaims that are already raging like a live fire in Scotland, and within only a few months will plunge the entire kingdom into civil war. And massive spoiler alert, it will ultimately result in the downfall of Mary, her imprisonment, her forced abdication, her flight to England, and I suppose in the very long run, her execution at Fotheringay.
So that argument about did Mary do it has raged for centuries, effectively, hasn't it? And you made the point in your notes, Tom, that the two of the great books about Mary Queen of Scots, I mean, there are multiple very good books, but one of them, Antonia Fraser's. Antonia Fraser thinks that Mary is absolutely a brilliant person who would never have done it, doesn't she? That soft heart, that horror of bloodshed, that inclination towards mercy. I mean, blowing up her husband and then murdering him in a very baroque way in a garden is the last thing that Mary would have done. On the other hand, somebody you've mentioned a lot in this series, Jenny Wormold, great historian of early modern Scotland, she absolutely despises Mary Queen of Scots.
If there's a chance to stick the dagger in, she'll take it.
Yeah. And she basically says, if she didn't murder Darnley, she was, and I quote, almost the only member of Edinburgh's political society who knew nothing about it. So basically, it reflects it even more badly on her if she didn't murder him than if she did.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, those two books kind of articulate the very polarized position. But since they were written, a third study of Darnley's murder has come out, which I think provides a solution to the crime that, if not exactly definitive, because, at the distance of however long it is, it's hard to do that. But I think it is as definitive a solution as we are likely to get. And this is an account in John Guy's biography of Mary, My Heart is My Own, which was published in 2004 and was the inspiration for the Saoirse Ronan film. And what Guy did, he's a brilliant scholar of the Tudors and the 16th century more generally, and he has gone back and looked at all the original documents in a way that hadn't been done before. I mean, amazing to think of it. And most of these documents are English reports written chiefly to Cecil. In the Victorian period, they were collected and kind of bunged into those, the kind of enormous, vast leather-bound volumes that Victorian archivists absolutely loved. Lots of them were miscatalogued, misinterpreted, and the result of that has been that their provenance has often been obscured, the dates in which they were written, certain key texts have been overlooked. And so Guy has done the hard yards, and we reap the benefits,
right?
Because essentially we will be drawing very heavily on Guy's work for our account of Darnley's murder.
So before we get into the murder, Tom, let's set the scene a little bit. We ended last time, Mary has given birth to Lord Darnley's son. So I'm guessing most people will have heard the previous episodes in this series. So Mary, Queen of Scots, slightly beleaguered. Lord Darnley, an absolutely terrible man. You described him as one of the worst men we've ever talked about, I think.
No, I didn't say that. So he's not one of the worst men as in kind of Himmler.
Right.
He's not like that.
It's not in Himmler's league. Oh my gosh, that's high praise.
But he's kind of like the worst kind of person that you'd meet at a university disco at St. Andrews.
Yeah, red trousers.
You said, cock chick.
Yeah.
That's what he is. He's
right.
Probably the biggest cock chick in British history.
By the way, that's not us being rude. That's Scottish. That's a Scottish source, right?
Yeah. That's authentic 16th century slang.
Yeah. So anyway, Mary has given birth to his son, the future James VI of Scotland. Big friend of the rest of his history, tongue too big for his mouth, loves a witch. And she's done that. She gave birth to him. There was maximum security in Edinburgh Castle. And the reason for that was that 3 months before the birth of James, her secretary, David Rizzio, the Italian bloke, had been murdered in Holyrood, in her private quarters, in ludicrous circumstances. And the conspirators had included her chancellor, who's this sinister and sort of conspiratorial Machiavel called the Earl of Morton. There's her Secretary of State, William Maitland, and then Lord Darnley, her own husband, has been in on it. And just to remind ourselves, she dealt with them in different ways, hadn't she? So Morton, all of those guys, she'd exiled effectively to England and she'd confiscated their lands. Maitland has been disgraced because he didn't take part in the actual murder, so his punishment's not as harsh. And Darnley, I mean, this is bonkers, she basically used her feminine wiles to persuade him to change sides. She promised him access to her bedchamber and her person. Anyway, so all sweetness and light for Mary. She's won the day. Or has she?
Or has she? I mean, the key problem she faces is that Darnley remains a complete nightmare. he's a massive loose cannon. And also in his personal behavior, he's terrible. He's very, very disrespectful to her, just a kind of awful person. So an example of this is that in August, so by now Mary has recovered from childbirth, she and Darnley, they want to go hunting, and they go to a place called Traquair House in the Borders, centre of very famous hunting ground. But it turns out to be a disaster because actually the deer are vanishing. The woods are starting to be chopped down. There isn't enough for Darnley to enjoy a good hunt. And he gets very cross about this. And one night he just gets spectacularly drunk. I mean, he's always drunk, but this time he's really badly drunk. And he leans over to Mary and says, we're going to go we're going to go hunt deer tomorrow and you're bloody well going to come, right? And Mary doesn't want to do it. And she whispers in his ear dramatic news. She says she thinks that she may be pregnant again. And Darnley doesn't care. He reveals this to everyone in the hall. He says, never mind, if we lose this one, we shall make another. What? And the Lord of Traquair, his host, is appalled by this and rebukes him and tells him that he doesn't talk like a Christian. And Darnley, he snaps his fingers in Lord Traquair's face. What, ought we not to work a mare well when she is with foal? What? And this goes down like a lead balloon with Lord Traquair, with Mary's attendants, and with Mary herself. And she seems to have been so offended by this that she breaks the holiday off and leaves early.
She's quite right.
Yeah, I think she is.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I thought he was a bad man, but now that I've heard him speak,
that's exactly how he spoke.
I think he's even worse than I had imagined.
Not quite as bad as Himmler still, but maybe nudging up there.
Yeah, he's in the medals. He's on the podium, isn't he?
Anyway, so Mary, understandably, she goes back to Edinburgh, to Holyrood, and to her baby, little James, who is described by the English ambassador as being well-proportioned and like to prove a godly prince. I mean, hasn't looked at his tongue, obviously.
No.
And Mary is so anxious about what Darnley might get up to that she moves him from Holyrood to Stirling. And en route, James is guarded by 500 musketeers. And of course, Stirling is the very castle where Mary's mother, Mary of Guise, had taken her to keep her for safekeeping. And what Mary is worried about, I think, is that Darnley might seize James and appoint himself as regent. And that would then enable him essentially, perhaps even to imprison Mary, certainly to kind of sideline her and effectively rule Scotland as regent until James comes of age. So if Mary has control of James, then essentially she's blocking that option off for Darnley. Mary recognises that the issue is what it's always been, which is that Darnley is not content with his status as a kind of a consort, that he wants to be king. He wants to be the King of Scotland, which Mary had promised him and then had kind of changed her mind. And because of this, Darnley is endlessly plotting. He's endlessly coming up with schemes. So he's not just plotting to make himself King of Scotland. Madly, he also wants to make himself King of England. He's come up with, just such a mad scheme. He wants to capture Scarborough.
Like Harold Hardrada.
Yeah. So Scarborough is a rather, it's very picturesque, very attractive. It has a wonderful cricket festival. But it's not one of the great strongholds of England, I think it's fair to say. No. It's a kind of fishing village on the Yorkshire coast. And the other stronghold he wants to get is the Scilly Isles, which are an archipelago off the southwest corner of Cornwall. And his plan is that he's going to capture these places and then he's going to import Catholic armies from Europe. And he will then launch an invasion of England with these armies from Scarborough and the Scilly Isles. And it's completely mad. We should actually remind listeners that Darnley is Catholic. So this is part of the mix as well. So this plot falls through, it's absolutely stillborn. He's humiliated by this. And so he then has a massive strop and announces that he is going to leave Mary. He's had enough of her and he's going to go and settle abroad. And people might think, well, that's quite a good solution, isn't it? Well, it isn't. Firstly, because it would be very humiliating for Mary and, by extension, Scotland. But also, it would be a nightmare for the Protestant lords because the last thing that they want is a Catholic with a claim to the throne of Scotland making mischief for them with the Catholic powers of France and Spain or whatever on the continent. And so they are irate about it. Mary is appalled. She spends a whole night trying to make him see sense, saying, this is mad. Please don't do this. He refuses. And so she summons the Privy Council and she orders Darnley to appear before the Privy Council And the Privy Council asks Darnley to explain, what are you up to? What are you doing here? He can't really give a credible answer because basically his answer is, I'm cross. You're not treating me right. Yeah, I'm going off on a gap year. I mean, that's basically his pitch. And the Privy Council are so kind of stunned and appalled by what they've heard from him. They write officially to Catherine de' Medici in France and say, look, this guy is a lunatic. Have nothing to do with him. And if he does come to France and tries to set up, a royal court in exile or to create mischief or whatever, just do not touch him. And this, I think, is where the notion that he is a lunatic starts to come, because Elizabeth, in that letter that you quoted, refers to him as being mad. And I think that this is becoming part of the diplomatic chatter.
Right.
He's such an international embarrassment that saying that he's mad is less of a humiliation than saying, well, we just can't control him.
So with Darnley moving towards the sort of margins, does that mean that Mary now has to rely on a lot of people that she's previously fallen out with? So, for example, if she's talking to the French, her foreign policy expert is this bloke Maitland, who was her Secretary of State, who had been disgraced after the Rizzio murder.
Yeah, he had, but I think he'd always basically been Team Mary, and I think Mary knows that. And as you say, I mean, she needs his advice. So he's brought out of his disgrace. He's effectively pardoned, and he's restored to his post as Secretary of State. But there is one condition, and that is that Maitland is reconciled with the one Scottish lord on whom Mary is now relying more than any other, because he has proved himself consistently loyal. And this is the Earl of Bothwell. Mm-hmm. And Bothwell is this swaggering, muscle-bound, got a tremendous ginger moustache. Very fond of a punch-up, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But he's been at Mary's back for a decade and more, because he's stood behind Mary of Guise, her mother, when she'd been in trouble. Bothwell had rallied to her cause in the wake of Rizzio's murder, and Bothwell had helped to drive Morton and his fellow conspirators into exile.
Bothwell, though a very formidable man, is on the receiving end, isn't he? That autumn, I mean, the most Scottish thing that's ever happened. He's been attacked, left with life-threatening injuries by a man who's called.
Come on, what's he called, Dominic?
Yeah. He's called Little Jock Elliot.
Yeah.
So surely he played for Dunfermline in the 1980s.
Yeah. So he is Little Jock Elliot is a notorious reaver.
Right. Of course he is.
And the reavers are the bandits who infest the border regions between England and Scotland, and particularly this region called the Debatable Lands, which is a stretch of the border. And the Hermitage, which is Bothwell's ancestral pile, is absolutely at the centre of the Debatable Lands.
I love the fact that after 700 episodes, and people have been like, when are you going to do Scottish history? Do some Scottish history. We could have done the Scottish Enlightenment. We could have chosen any element, but instead we chose like people headbutting each other in debatable lands called Little Jock, because we absolutely wanted to lean into their sense of what Scotland is.
I mean, just to reassure Scottish listeners, the debatable lands are the most lawless and bandit-ridden corner, not just in Scotland, but in all of Britain. So we are emphasising that. And this clearly is why Bothwell is so given to violence, is that you have to be violent to hold your own in this kind of landscape. So he's attacked and left for dead, covered with all kinds of wounds. The news is brought to Mary, who at the time is in Jedburgh, which is about 25 miles away to the east. And she's on assizes, so she's going around hearing complaints from her subjects, basically kind of showing herself doing her royal duties. The gossip will be, that is reported later, is that the moment she hears the news that Bothwell has been attacked, she leaves Jedburgh and gallops off alone to the Hermitage. This is not true. She waits for a week because she still has the assizes to hear, and nor does she ride there alone. So Murray, her half-brother, he goes with her. Maitland is there, a large retinue. But even so, I mean, it is a startling feat of horsemanship, because it's 25 miles there over really very rough terrain. I mean, I've been there and seen it, and I respect Mary very highly for having travelled that far. She spends 2 hours by Bothwell's bedside, and it becomes clear that Bothwell isn't going to die, that he's on the road to recovery. And then they ride back. So that is a full and active day. And it turns out to be too much for Mary. She gets back to Jedburgh and she falls very, very dangerously ill. So whether it's overexertion, if she had been pregnant, she mentioned this to Darnley, I think by this point she's lost the baby, so it may be the after effects of a miscarriage. I'm not sure. But certainly her life is feared for. At one point, she lies in bed for half an hour, and I quote, eyes closed, mouth fast, and feet and arms stiff and cold. The Earl of Moray, her half-brother, who I think is consumed with resentment that she is the queen and he's not the king, an accident of his illegitimacy. He starts laying hands on all her silver plate and rings. So it's like Henry V making off with the crown before his father is dead. And Mary doesn't die because she has a very skillful French doctor, and he is able to kind of bring her back from the brink of death. And 2 weeks on from when it seemed like she was going to die, she's ready to continue on her way. And the impact of this near-death experience is very profound, I think, for Mary. I think that she really starts to think, what kind of kingdom am I going to leave behind? It generates a massive anxiety spike among the Scottish nobility. They don't want a change of regime. They don't want Darnley on the loose. They are worried that it will result in anarchy. And so they are very committed to keeping Mary on the throne and ensuring that Darnley doesn't cause her too much trouble. And the question then is, well, how are we going to deal with Darnley? I mean, how are we going to make sure that Mary isn't kind of embroiled in endless trouble from him?
What on earth could they possibly do?
What could we do? And it is Maitland, the Secretary of State, who was the guy who had first suggested the murder of Rizzio in very kind of subtle, insinuating terms, who again now starts to broach the possibility, maybe, of another murder. So he even goes so far as to kind of put this into writing. So he writes to the Scottish ambassador in Paris shortly after Mary has had this brush with death. It is a heartbreak for her to think that he should be her husband, and how to be free of him, she sees no way out. But obviously, he is suggesting that he might. He is travelling with Mary from Jedburgh, and they go to a place called Craigmillar Castle. And they arrive there on the 20th of November. It's just south of Edinburgh. And its laird is Catholic, which means that he is absolutely reliable. I mean, he's completely Team Mary. And Mary gets there and she then falls ill again. And so all the lords in her retinue, which include Maitland, Moray, and by this time Bothwell, because he's risen up from his sickbed, he's covered in scars, but he's kind of rough and tough. They all have time while she's lying in her sickbed to discuss what might be done with Darnley. And when Mary recovers, they go to see her, all except for Moray, who by this point is worried at the way in which the conversation is turning and doesn't really want to be a part of it. But Maitland and Bothwell and all the other lads, they go to Mary and they say, look, you have got to divorce Darnley. Moray does not think that she should divorce Darnley because that would just leave him on the loose. But all the others think, yeah, let's go for it. Mary listens to them and she kind of agrees in principle, but her anxiety obviously is that it wouldn't be damaging to James. She says, I will have it provided it is not prejudicial to my son.
Yeah.
And then she asks, well, is Moray, does he agree to this? Because I notice he's not here. And Maitland answers, I am assured he will look through his fingers thereto and will behold our doings, saying nothing to the same.
In other words, he's just going to let us kind of get on with it.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it was just a divorce, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But that implies that this may be more than a divorce, that it may be a slightly more permanent separation, shall we say.
That is a hint that Maitland then drops to Mary, which Mary becomes very agitated. And she presses Maitland, well, what exactly do you mean? And she goes on to say, I will that ye do nothing whereto any spot may be laid to my honour or conscience. And therefore I pray you rather let the matter be in the state as it is, i.e. don't murder him. And for now, let's leave the whole question of divorce to one side.
But the clock is ticking a little bit, isn't it? Because they're going to christen James, their son. And I suppose if Darnley had turned up to that and sort of asserted himself as James's father, that might have slightly changed the game. But very foolishly, it happens at Stirling, doesn't it? 17th of December.
Yeah.
And Darnley has a massitive tantrum and refuses to come because he's cross that he's not king.
Yes. I mean, it's such poor behaviour to miss the christening of your own son because, you can't wear a crown.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's not there. there is a man on hand who Mary can turn to take Darnley's place. And this is the much scarred and mustachioed Earl of Bothwell. You know, he's got to look smart for the occasion. And so Mary makes sure to provide him with a very fine outfit of kind of gorgeous blue clothes. And so Bothwell is strutting around looking tremendous. And of course, this is much noted.
Right. Yeah.
People observe that Darnley isn't there, but Bothwell's looking great in his suit. But even Bothwell refuses to attend the christening. And so does Moray, Bothwell's old rival, Mary's half-sister, because they're Protestants. And the ceremony, the baptism, is a Catholic one.
Right.
So it might look as though the whole thing has been a disaster. Darnley's not there. Bothwell is, creating gossip. Bothwell and Moray aren't attending the baptism. But actually, it's been a triumph behind the scenes. Because what has been happening while the lords have been plotting what to do about Darnley is that Mary, I said that, her mind has really been concentrated. She's really thinking, well, what do I want from the future? And so she has written to Elizabeth in England, queen to queen, not going through Maitland, not going through Cecil. And she says to Elizabeth, look, I've very nearly died and I've been worrying about my son. So what I request is that if I die, would you become James's protector, which in effect means becoming James's foster mother? And Elizabeth is very touched by this and she accepts. And as a token of this, she agrees to be James's godmother, even though the baptism ceremony is a Catholic one. And she sends Mary this magnificent bejeweled font of solid gold. And the detente between the two queens, relations between them had been quite tense. It's now sufficient that they can continue to discuss policy without recourse to their respective ministers and begin privately negotiating over what had always been Mary's ultimate dream, namely to be acknowledged by Elizabeth as heir apparent to the throne of England.
Wow, that's looking good for Mary.
It is looking good for Mary. And it was her illness that precipitated this kind of diplomatic breakthrough, that this private conversation. And I think also as part of this, Mary is thinking, I'm reconciled with Elizabeth. Why don't I get everybody else to be reconciled? So on Christmas Eve, she formally pardons the Rizzio plotters. So that's Morton and all that gang. On the 6th of January, she allows Maitland to marry posh Mary, the one of the four Marys who Maitland had been desperately in love with, despite the 20-year age gap. And on the 9th of January, Morton crosses from Berwick into Scotland. He is home. And on the 14th of January, Morton and Maitland meet at a place called Whittingham Castle, which is, again, a few miles ride from Edinburgh, all these castles dotted around the capital. And present for their meeting is their old adversary from the Rizzio plot, the man who Mary had turned to when Rizzio got murdered, the Earl of Bothwell. So amazing.
Yeah.
Two different groups of people meeting up to discuss things. I mean, what could they be discussing, these three men?
While all that's happening, what's happened to Darnley? He refused to come to the baptism of his own son. Has he just been off hunting, or has he been plotting something more sinister?
Well, he's returned to his plotting. His plot is exactly what Mary's been worried he might do, which is to abduct James and to imprison her. And so she laments this and writes to Maitland, for the king, our husband, always we perceive him occupied and busy enough to have inquisition of our doings. So in other words, he's trying to map out what her movements are so that he can abduct her. And this is despite the fact that Darnley hasn't been very well. And actually he gets really seriously ill with syphilis, obviously.
But of course.
What else would he have? And ominously, from Mary's point of view, his sick room is in Glasgow, which is the great power base of his father, the Earl of Lennox. And this is alarming. I mean, Mary doesn't want trouble from Lennox as well as from Darnley. And so she thinks, I've got to get him back. I can't allow him to be there with his father. So I think very bravely, she rides to Glasgow. She tends to him in his sick bed and she urges him to come back with her. And specifically, she says, come back with me to Craigmillar Castle. You'll be much better there. You'll be nearer Edinburgh. We can look after you properly. Darnley initially refuses. He feels safe and secure in Glasgow. But finally he agrees, yes. Why does he agree to do this? So John Guy's theory is, and I quote, to win over Darnley, Mary had to prove her affection for him in the only way his carnal and degenerate nature understood. This meant offering to have sex with him again as soon as he was cured. He's very into the notion that Mary is endlessly promising Darnley sex as a way of kind of trying to rein him in. I think there is another possible reason why Darnley agrees to come back with Mary and basically try and be reconciled with her, which is, of course, that Morton is now back on the scene. And Morton was the co-conspirator in the Rizzio plot, who Darnley spectacularly double-crossed. And Morton is not the kind of guy who takes being double-crossed lying down. I mean, he is a very, very menacing and dangerous opponent. I think that Darnley probably is thinking, Mary, now I need her, actually, if I'm going to be kept safe from Morton. He says, I'm not going to go to Craigmillar Castle because its laird, as we mentioned, is too Team Mary. It's too kind of pro-Stuart. So he's probably worried that Mary might lock him up in Craigmillar Castle. It's a place full of dungeons. He also says, I'm not going to go to Holyrood because he's covered in weeping pustules and he's far too vain. He doesn't want to be seen, covered in spots.
He's not a very appetizing prospect for her to sleep with. I mean, so if she has made that offer, that's a big offer from her.
Yes, absolutely. So Darnley probably is going back with Mary and feeling slightly fonder towards her than he had previously done. And Mary is obviously trying to be as nice to him as she possibly can because she's essentially trying to wrangle him. And so she agrees to Darnley's proposal, which is that rather than stay in Holyrood or in Craigmillar, he will stay in relative isolation on the edge of Edinburgh. And he suggests a house right next to the city wall. The house is barely furnished and it stands beside the Kirk Field, a ruined medieval church. It's simultaneously isolated so no one can see his spots, but it's near enough to Holyrood that Mary can come out and visit him. So it seems perfect. So on the 1st of February, Mary arrives in Edinburgh. He's got Darnley in a horse litter. Darnley is installed in the house at Kirk Field, and there he is to wait while his treatment for syphilis is completed and his weeping pustules dry up. The course goes very well. A week and a half pass. Darnley is almost ready to come out of the house at the Kirk Field. And then, in the early hours of the 10th of February, around 2:00 in the morning, Mary and most of Edinburgh are awakened by a massive flash of light and then an enormous explosion. And we're told that the sound of the explosion was equivalent to the firing of 30 cannons. And the next day, Mary writes to her ambassador in France with news of what had happened. The matter is horrible, she wrote, and so strange as we believe the like was never heard of in any country. Darnley, her husband, the man with more enemies probably than any man has ever had in Scotland, is dead. By whom it has been done, Mary writes to the ambassador in France, or in what matter, it appears not as yet.
Crikey. Well, on that bombshell, Tom, I'm so excited. I think we should take a break. And when we return after the break, we will investigate. We will don our true crime podcasting kilts. And we will investigate what happened in the 24 hours leading up to Lord Darnley's murder. Tom, I think we should name the key conspirators. We should unmask the plotters. And we will answer the crucial question, who did it? And was it Mary Queen of Scots? So we'll see you after the break.
This episode is brought to you by Surfshark. Now, had Mary Queen of Scots been just a little bit more careful with her correspondence, then she might well have avoided becoming a cautionary tale of treason. So she slipped her ciphered letters into beer barrels. Methods today have changed, but the risk of interception, of course, always remains. Your information is more vulnerable than ever, and perhaps especially when it's online. Trackers and advertisers and apps collecting your data all the time. And if you're using public Wi-Fi, then your activity can be monitored by anyone who is sharing the network that you are on. And this is where Surfshark comes in. It's a VPN that encrypts your internet connection, thereby keeps your personal data secure. So you can also change your digital location, giving you access to your favorite sites and streaming services wherever you are. So protect your data, Browse securely from anywhere. No cipher, no courier, certainly no beer barrel required. Go to surfshark.com/TRIH, or you can use the code TRIH at the checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN plus a 30-day money-back guarantee. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory. Welcome back to The Rest is History. Exciting true crime podcasting with a Scottish twist. So, Tom, let's kick off in a place very close to your heart, which is Berwick on the Anglo-Scottish border. Now, there's a bloke there called Sir William Drury, and he is England's eyes and ears. He's the marshal of the town. He's basically an intelligence officer. And he thinks he knows what's been going on, doesn't he? Because he sends a report within a day of Darnley's murder to Elizabeth I's Chief Minister, William Cecil. So take us into that bit of the story.
Yeah, so he has agents everywhere in Edinburgh. And this initial report establishes the kind of parameters of the mystery, but he will continue to send increasingly detailed, increasingly forensic accounts of what he thinks happened. And I think that these reports, combined with, we get confessions from participants in the conspiracy, testimonials from witnesses, and you put them all together. And I think that it does enable a fairly accurate account of the events that culminated in the death of Darnley to be drawn up. So when you look at these, what do they tell us? So let's look at Mary and Darnley first. Just to recap, Darnley had arrived at the place of his murder on the 1st of February, 1567. And this is Kirkerfield, which is a complex of houses built up beside an old ruined church on the southern fringes of Edinburgh. And the wall that had been built in the wake of the Battle of Flodden to keep the English out runs right past it. It's a very well-chosen location for an invalid to recuperate. It's on a hill, so it's above the kind of smoke and filth of Edinburgh. It's surrounded by gardens, so there's fresh air there, very much more salubrious than Holyrood. And as we said, by the 9th of February, Darnley has been convalescing there for a week and a half, and he's pretty much ready to go. The evening before Darnley is due to come back to Holyrood, Mary arrives in the evening with a whole train of lords and ladies, Bothwell very prominent among them. And they're celebrating this. They're celebrating the fact that Darnley will be coming back to join Mary the following day. And Mary is in an excellent mood. She feels that she's got Darnley back under her influence. He seems much more amenable than he had been. And that evening, Darnley is off his face on whiskey. He's developed a real taste for it. He starts groping her very publicly in front of everyone. And rather than giving him a slap or telling him to leave her alone, she gives him a ring as a token of her affection. So things seem to be looking up for the happy couple.
Yeah.
But I think the real reason that she's happy has nothing to do with Darnley and everything to do with these ongoing private negotiations with Elizabeth in England. It really looks now as though Mary's great dream of being publicly acknowledged as Elizabeth's heir might be on the verge of fulfillment. I mean, very hard to know with Elizabeth because she's always kind of playing hard to get. But Mary, I think, genuinely believes that her great dream might be close to fulfillment. So Darnley wants Mary to stay with him the night, But Mary doesn't, because one of her favourite servants has got married that afternoon and is holding a great celebration, a kind of wedding masque. And Mary has promised to go. And Mary always keeps her promises to her servants. And of course, also, she likes to dance. She doesn't want to miss out on that. So she leaves Darnley. She arrives back at Holyrood about 11 o'clock. She attends her servant's masque, but she doesn't stay too long. She's in bed by midnight. And then at 2 o'clock, so an hour and a half later, she is woken by the destruction of Darnley's house at Kirkerfields. And having heard the explosion, she summons Bothwell, who, of course, is the Sheriff of Edinburgh, so it's his responsibility to investigate, and Bothwell goes off. And when he comes back and he says that the house has been blown up and that Darnley has been found dead, witnesses are pretty much agreed that she is appalled by the news. And in a way that one might think is perhaps typical of Mary, she's appalled less for Darnley than by the thought that it might have been targeted at her. She says, "This crime was dressed as well for us as for the king, for we lay the most part of all the last week in that same lodging, and was there accompanied with the most part of the lords that are in this town that same night." So it's all about her, basically. But also, and I think an extra reason why she's devastated is that she knows how Darnley's murder is going to land across Europe. This is going to be seen by the crowned heads of Christendom as regicide, which they obviously view as being a terrible crime.
They rank him as a king, even though he isn't one.
He's married to a queen. I mean, he's not officially a king, but they will see it as effectively being regicide. And she knows that one person who will be absolutely appalled is her royal cousin, Elizabeth of England, with whom she has been in negotiations. So that, I think, is the key point. The timing of Darnley's murder for Mary could not have been worse.
So if Mary didn't authorize or approve the murder, then who did?
Well, by early May, you remember we've got this
Englishman in Berwick,
Yeah, this guy, Sir William Drury. He thinks he has cracked the case. And so he writes to Cecil and he names the two leading culprits. And probably the name of these two leading culprits will not come as a surprise to listeners. Morton, Drury writes, is noted to have assured friendship to Bothwell, which, to be the thankfuller now for his favour, showed him in his absence and trouble, he intendeth to continue. And this is a brilliant piece of detective work. Most people think that Bothwell and Morton are deadly enemies. They'd been on opposed sides in the imbroglio around the murder of Rizzio. But actually, what Drury has found out is that it was Bothwell who had pushed Mary to pardon Morton. And the reason that he had done that was because Bothwell knew that even though he'd been opposed to Morton over the Rizzio plot, any resentment that Morton might feel towards Bothwell is as nothing compared to the utter loathing that Morton has for Darnley, who had double-crossed him over the Rizzio plot. And so Bothwell and Morton, and Maitland as well, had met up on the 14th of January, and they had had discussions. And we left it hanging in the previous half. What were these discussions about? Well, Drury has found out what these discussions were about. They were committing themselves to the murder of Darnley. Very rapidly, they had succeeded in signing up large numbers of other prominent Scottish nobles. What had motivated all of them? So Morton is obviously motivated by personal resentment, but the number of people who are prepared to sign up to the murder of Darnley reflects the fact that he is seen as a massive, massive problem to be eliminated. And it's very telling, for instance, that one of the conspirators seems to have been the Laird of Traquair, who was the man who had witnessed Darnley's terrible behaviour at his house.
Yeah.
Darnley's residence in Kirkerfields provide the conspirators with the perfect opportunity. But of course, the moment he leaves Kirkerfield and goes back to Mary, it then becomes much harder to eliminate him without also killing Mary, which they don't want to do. And Bothwell, who has been in close attendance on Mary throughout, I mean, he's absolutely keeping abreast of Darnley's potential movements. And so that's why it's the night before he's due to leave that they realise, well, we've got to go for it. It is also Bothwell who supplies the gunpowder for the explosion, and he can do that because he is the Sheriff of Edinburgh, and so people would expect to see him in charge of men who are kind of, rumbling through the streets of Edinburgh with wagons or whatever. So on the evening of the 9th of February, as Mary and Darnley are partying in the rooms above them, Morton's men are mining the cellars of the house. And in fact, Mary runs into one of these people. He'd been a page of Bothwell. He's now become a valet to Mary, and he has the nickname of French Paris. And Mary sees him and says, "Jesu, Paris, how begrimed you are."
Oh, what a thing to say to somebody. I mean, mad.
His face is streaked, but Mary can see through the dirt that he is blushing.
Oh.
But he says nothing, just twists his cap.
How begrimed you are. I'd like to use that. I'm going to use that line.
You can use it to Arthur, surely, if he's...
I will. Well, he's always begrimed, to be fair. What I don't understand, right? I get the explosion. Begrimed people have mined this building and it's blown up. What I don't get is why Darnley didn't die in the explosion. Why is he lying in the garden next to a chair, a rope and a cloak? Are the Freemasons involved in some peculiar way before being founded?
Yeah, this is the whole Agatha Christie dimension to it, which has always so intrigued and fascinated people, and I think complicated attempts to solve the murder. Guy's explanation, which is essentially a refinement of the reports that Drury has been sending to Cecil. So I think Drury is the guy who really nails it. Drury reports to Cecil that on the night of Darnley's murder, he suspects nothing of what is to come. He makes his farewells to Mary, and then he goes to bed. And shortly afterwards, he's woken by the sounds of muffled footsteps from below. He looks out of a side window and he sees kind of shadowy, cloaked figures stealthily moving around. And he is a guy who knows he has lots of enemies. And so he assumes the worst and he reaches for a thick fur cloak. He then wakes his valet and other servants, and he goes to a window that looks directly out over the city wall, which kind of adjoins the house in which he's in. The servants get a chair and they tie a rope to this chair, and they then lower Darnley and his valet into the street below, so outside the city wall. However, disaster. Drury's greatest investigative achievement has been to identify what happens next, and in particular, to identify the man who had been on patrol in the street in case of just such an eventuality.
Right.
And this is a guy we've already met. He's a bloke called Andrew Kerr of Faldonside, and he was the man who, in the course of the Rizzio murder, had pointed a loaded gun at Mary's pregnant belly.
Yep.
He, as one of the Rizzio conspirators, is as consumed with hatred for Darnley as Morton. And like Morton, is absolutely set on getting his revenge. And this is despite the fact that Darnley is actually a kinsman of Andrew Kerr. And to this end, Kerr, like Morton, has teamed up with Bothwell. And Drury writes to Cecil and details what happened next. The king was long of dying, and to his strengths made debate for his life, which essentially means that he had tried to reason with Kerr and his men. And this report is substantiated in a remarkable way by the testimony of old women who lived in cottages on the side of this road and who were interrogated by agents of the Scottish Privy Council. And one of these women reported hearing Darnley cry out, "Oh, my kinsman, have mercy on me for the love of him who had mercy on all the world." But it's no good. Darnley and his valet are both strangled, so that's why there are no marks on their bodies. And then they are taken and laid out in a neighbouring garden, and the chair, the rope, and the cloak are dumped beside them. Now, the issue obviously is Darnley is dead, so do they need to blow up the house? The problem is that there might be all kinds of evidence. They don't really want the gunpowder to be found because then the lead might go back to Bothwell. So they think, oh, well, let's just blow it up anyway. So that's what they do. And the fact that you have this kind of, the chair and the rope and everything in the garden and the explosion is what has made it such an enduring and tantalizing mystery and why it's been so hard for people to solve. But I think that solution that Guy gives in his book, it seems to me the likeliest explanation for what actually happened.
So it's not a ritualistic killing and it's not been designed that way.
No.
It's just a result of him having tried to escape and this bloke Kerr kind of finding him. So they strangled him. Why didn't they just stab him? That had worked with Rizzio. Why the strangulation? That's my question.
I suppose to make his death seem as mysterious as possible. to kind of throw people off the scent.
And also, you just want to mix things up a bit, don't you? You don't want to just use the same method every time.
Yeah, exactly. They've already done the whole stabbing stuff.
Right. Yeah. Try something different.
I mean, what would have been brilliant if they'd had kind of 56 stab wounds like with Rizzio. But
yeah, but no. All right. So a couple of questions that are still hanging. Number one, is it plausible that, as Elizabeth sort of suggested in that letter, that Mary had been looking through her fingers at the deed, that maybe she didn't officially authorize it formally, but maybe she kind of knew that it was in the air and she just gave them a little wink, or she did nothing. She knew it was coming, but she did nothing to stop it.
Well, it's a very good question. And we know of someone who did exactly that. And this is the Earl of Moray, whom Maitland, in a very suggestive prefiguring of Elizabeth's use of the same phrase in her letter to Mary, had correctly predicted that although he wouldn't participate in the plot against Darnley, he would look through his fingers at preparations for the murder. So in other words, he would give it a nod and a wink. Basically, Moray knew what was going to happen and he didn't inform Mary. And instead, aware that things were coming to a head, he had absented himself from Edinburgh and retreated to his estate in Fife so that he could say, look, nothing to do with me, mate. Mary, of course, by contrast, I mean, she spends the evening before Darnley's murder, partying in a house that is absolutely packed with gunpowder, which seems to me a very strong circumstantial piece of evidence that she knew nothing whatsoever of the crime. And also, there was a slight hint of amusement when you read Antonia Fraser's account of Mary's tender heart.
Such a kind person.
I think that's right. And in fact, I mean, from your perspective, I would imagine that's part of the problem with Mary. She is too tender-hearted.
Don't play the game unless you're going to play it properly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's my take on history, generally.
I think the conspirators feel like you do. That's why they don't tell her. That's why they don't even hint at it, because they're worried that she might step in and say, no, you're not allowed to do this. And I think also another key piece of evidence that Mary didn't do it is her evident panic when she is told that Darnley had been killed, because she does genuinely, it seems to me, she's very, very worried that she had been the target. So as Guy puts it, Mary was a good actress, but not this good. So all of that, I think, kind of adds up to absolve Mary of the crime. But just to reiterate, the key piece of evidence, I think, is that the timing for her is terrible in relation to her negotiations with Elizabeth, because she has everything to lose. And actually, in the event she does, because that letter from Elizabeth, which we began this episode with, I mean, it's a warning shot across Mary's bows. It's saying essentially, solve the crime, arraign those who are responsible for it, or else there's no way that you are going to be my heir.
Does Mary solve the crime? The answer, I guess, is no. And this is disastrous for Mary.
Yeah, and her failure to do that results, in her total ruin. And that, of course, leads to the second puzzle, which is why doesn't she manage to solve the crime? Because, as we know, there are very detailed and effective investigations. There are people from the Privy Council who are interviewing the old women and taking down their records. There's Drury's report that's gone to Cecil. Why aren't these being collated and publicised rather than, as actually happens, being suppressed and in lots of cases completely forgotten? And the answer, again, I think is pretty obvious. It's because those who commissioned these reports had every interest in suppressing them, because the Privy Council, is absolutely full of people who had actually been responsible for Darnley's murder. So Bothwell, Morton, Maitland.
Right.
And of those three, Bothwell, Morton, Maitland, two in particular have a real reason to lie low and allow the rumour to do its work, because one of those three is being fingered for the crime. And so the other two can say, well, let's lie low and let him take the blame. And the person who is being fingered for it is Bothwell. And accusations against Bothwell are starting to be laid within a week of Darnley's murder by his father, the Earl of Lennox. Placards and graffiti and cartoons start to appear across the streets of Edinburgh, charging Bothwell directly with the murder. Kind of caricatures of Bothwell start appearing on buildings, and they have the label, "Here is the murder of the king." And this, of course, is very bad news for Bothwell, but it is also very, very bad news for Mary, because rumours have been swirling throughout Scotland long before Darnley's murder that Mary has got a real crush on Bothwell. And some of the evidence for this is bogus. So, for instance, the story that she had ridden alone to the Hermitage when Bothwell had been stabbed. That wasn't true, but the fact the story was told is suggestive of how the trend of gossip is going. And some of the stories are true. So, for instance, Mary had given Bothwell a spectacular blue suit at the christening, and she had kind of basically employed Bothwell to take the place of Darnley, her husband, who had refused to attend. So you can kind of see how these rumours, they have legs. And because of that, it doesn't take long for graffiti to start appearing on the walls of Edinburgh, charging that not only is Bothwell guilty of Darnley's murder, but Mary is as well.
And what about the English dimension to this, Tom? Because we started the whole episode with Elizabeth I's letter. What about Elizabeth and her chief minister, Cecil? What do they make of all this? Are they preparing to use this against Mary effectively, sort of cynically?
Cecil, definitely. We've been talking throughout this series how Cecil is Mary's great hidden enemy. He's actively working to stop Mary succeeding to the English throne, but also he's pretty keen on toppling Mary from her own throne. And so he sees a huge opportunity here. Why on earth would he publish anything that might help to absolve Mary? And I think definitely he is kind of pouring poison into Elizabeth's ear. So remember that phrase, looking through fingers, that Maitland had applied to Moray and that Elizabeth writes in her letter to Mary. I think it's very easy to imagine Cecil having dropped precisely that phrase into conversation with Elizabeth, and Elizabeth then using it herself in her letter. And then there is that anonymous traitor whom Elizabeth referred to in her letter, comparing him to the minister of Satan. She doesn't need to name him because it's so self-evidently Bothwell. Now, you ask, does Elizabeth, like Cecil, want to see Mary ruined? No, she absolutely doesn't. Quite the opposite. So just to quote that letter again, I exhort you, I counsel you, and I beseech you to take this thing so much to heart that you will not fear to touch even him whom you have nearest to you if the thing touches him. What Elizabeth is trying to do is to help Mary safeguard her throne and not allow her reputation to be torched by this devastating accumulation of hostile rumour, of which two rumours in particular are the most lethal. One, that she had joined with Bothwell in the plot to murder Darnley, and secondly, that she had done this out of an adulterous passion for Bothwell. And so Elizabeth is saying, for God's sake, have nothing to do with Bothwell. Yeah. Arraign him, convict him, execute him. But the big question is, of course, will Mary listen to this self-evidently excellent advice?
Well, Mary has a history in this series of making very poor decisions. So next time we will discover whether she redeems herself and makes the right choice, or whether things get even darker for her. Now, the only way to listen to that episode right now, because I imagine most people are gagging to find out the answer, the only way to do it is to join our own murderous conspiracy, the Rest is History Club, at therestishistory.com. And if you do that, you can hear right away what happened next in this extraordinary story. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. Your info is in endless places that could expose you to identity theft, leading to lost funds. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, our restoration specialists will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.